In this video, I'll be discussing the outstanding 2022 vintage in Bordeaux and also identifying some wines that you may want to consider purchasing on futures. I'll be identifying at least one top performer from each of the different AOCs in Bordeaux. So we'll have at least 5 wines from the left bank and 2 or 3 from the right bank. By all accounts, 2022 was an outstanding vintage in Bordeaux. Many critics are even saying it may surpass the legendary 1982 vintage. This is definitely another vintage where there was some very hot, dry weather. In that respect, it compares favorably to vintages such as 1982, 1989, 1990, and 2009. What I like best about these vintages is that while they certainly have the potential to age, they also show well in their youth. And so for these vintages, you may not need to wait as long to enjoy these wines. While hot weather can produce wines that are flabby and high in alcohol by volume without sufficient acidity, that was not the case for 2022 Bordeaux. A couple things have been going on here. First, it seems like the grapevines themselves are better able to deal with the hot weather, having endured a number of warmer vintages in the past decade or two. Second, many Bordeaux wine producers have learned to deal with heat more effectively, both in the vineyard and in the winery, since the extremely hot 2003 vintage. In the vineyard, for example, many producers had a bigger or larger canopy on their grapevines, which helped to provide shade for the grapes. In addition, some used cover crops between the rows, which helped to keep the soils a little bit cooler than if they were just bare rocky soils. This is a technique that's oftentimes used in Languedoc. A couple techniques that producers used in the winery also helped to preserve freshness and elegance in the wine. For example, they fermented at lower temperatures and also used more gentle extraction techniques. In addition, some producers also used some whole cluster fermentation, which helped to reduce the overall alcohol by volume percentage and also provide a little bit of freshness to the wine. These techniques appear to have been extremely successful, as in general, the wines from 2022 have received rave reviews from critics and extremely high scores. I'll be discussing some of my favorites in this video, but since I'm an attorney, I first have to give you a disclaimer and a few words of warning. First, these scores were based on barrel samples, and in some instances, the final blend for these wines has not even been created yet. And even if the barrel sample is the final blend for a particular wine, that wine in many instances is still maturing in the cellar and is going to evolve in the next few years and may taste completely different by the time it's released. This is why many of the critics give their scores as a range rather than just picking one number. In addition, it's also important that you buy futures from a reputable producer if you decide to buy futures. This is so because it obviously doesn't do you any good to get a great deal on a wine if that retailer goes out of business and you never actually take receipt of that wine. Several viewers have requested my thoughts on the 2022 Chateau Laroque. For those who don't know, Chateau Laroque is a favorite wine on this channel because it represents exceptional value. This producer is located on the right bank in Saint-Emilion. It's an exceptional value these days because until recently it was sold only in France, and so its reputation has not yet caught up to its outstanding scores and the excellent wines that it's been making vintage after vintage recently. Chateau Laroque has around 54 hectares of vines. These vines average an impressive 50 years of age. Their vineyards are also located in an exceptional area, as they're very close to Trollong-Mondot. Laroque uses an extremely strict selection process, as only 45% of the harvest makes it into the top wine. The 2022 vintage is a blend that consists of 98% Merlot and 2% Cabernet Franc. This wine will spend 16 to 18 months in around 50% new French oak. Laroque received some impressive scores despite the fact that it sells for around $33 or $34 a bottle on futures. Indeed, it received 97-point scores from both Jeb Dunnock and Decanter. This is a wine that has some elegance. You can enjoy it now, but it certainly will improve and gain some complexity with age. I'd recommend giving it at least 5 to 7 years if you're able to resist. Well, I know that some of you will be upset that this price has gone up a little bit for this particular vintage. Chateau Laroque still represents exceptional value, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a wine of this quality selling for around $33 or $34. And this price is only going to get higher as the word gets out, so I would definitely keep stocking up on both the 2022 as well as earlier vintages of this outstanding wine. While Laroque is the only name I'll be discussing in detail from Saint-Emilion, certainly the top names also did extremely well. So if you're fans of Ausson, Angelus, Pavie, Cheval Blanc, you'll definitely want to keep an eye out for those wines as they all did extremely well. Another less heralded name you might want to consider is Clos Fourtet. This wine doesn't have pricing information yet, but certainly it received some extremely high scores. This wine is a blend of 90% Merlot, 7% Cabernet Franc, and 3% Cabernet Sauvignon. The Clos Fourtet received scores ranging from 96 to 98 points from both Galani and Jeb Dunnick. Another producer that I've been touting on this channel, most recently in my video about second growth Bordeaux producers, is Brane-Cantenac. Brane-Cantenac has been one of the absolute best values in Bordeaux for a number of recent vintages, and it's offered exceptional quality for the price, with bottles ranging from $75 to $90. In 2022, however, this producer took things to a whole other level. The quality of Brane-Cantenac comes close to rivaling that of Chateau Margaux and Chateau Palmer. While the price for this wine has not been set yet, it will undoubtedly be a small fraction of that charged for the Margaux and Palmer wines. This impressive wine received 3 different 98-point scores. One reason for the very high quality of this wine is the strict selection that they used. Only 42% of the harvest went into this top wine. This wine is a blend of 74% Cabernet Sauvignon, 23% Merlot, and 1% each of Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and even Carmenere. Yes, Carmenere. If you're unsure of whether or not to purchase the 2022 futures, you may want to try the 2019 vintage of Brane-Cantenac. If you enjoy that one, chances are that you'll really enjoy the 2022 vintage as well. While there were lots of outstanding wines in Saint-Julien in 2022, the best are probably Du Cru Beaucaillou and Leoville Barton. Those are also the most expensive, however. So in this video, I'll be focusing on the Leoville Barton, which rivaled the quality of those two impressive wines, but sells for only $93 a bottle on futures. One of the reasons for the strong performance by Leoville Barton in 2022 was the fact that it was able to use plot-by-plot vinification for the first time. This is so because it finally has its own winery. In the past, it had to make its wine at its sister property, Langlois Barton. But now they greatly expanded their capacity for winemaking, and they're able to use plot-by-plot vinification, which allows for much greater precision and which resulted in a definite uptick in quality for 2022. As a result, this impressive wine received a 98-point score, a 97-point score, and 3 96-point scores. This wine is a blend that consists of 83% Cabernet Sauvignon, 11.5% Merlot, and 5.5% Cabernet Franc. This outstanding wine is likely to exceed the quality of the excellent efforts Barton had in 2016 and 2019. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. Going back to Bordeaux's right bank, one of my favorite all-time Pomerol producers is La Conseillante. La Conseillante made a wine that's a candidate for Wine of the Vintage in 2022, with a couple scores from critics having 100 points on the high end of the range. So depending on how this wine turns out, it may have multiple perfect scores. This wine is a blend that consists of 87% Merlot and 13% Cabernet Franc. This wine is still maturing in 70% New French Oak. With Conseillante, you can enjoy it as early as 5 to 6 years after the vintage, but it peaks after about 10, and it's definitely one you can enjoy for 30 to 40 years with no problem at all. We recently had the 1990 vintage, and it was absolutely outstanding. This is a classic Pomerol that is silky and sensuous. It's incredibly elegant. If you enjoy Pomerol, this wine is an absolute no-brainer. Unfortunately, there's no pricing information released for this wine yet, but it's certain to be a fraction of the price of Petrus. In Pauillac, it's no surprise that the usual names did well, and so there were strong efforts by Mouton, Latour, Pichon-Lalonde, Pichon-Baron, Lynch-Bages, and also Pontet-Canet. But one that's a real standout and yet sells for only around $75 or $80 per bottle is Grand-Puy-Lacoste. Grand-Puy-Lacoste is a fifth growth in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, It's been on a hot streak since there was a complete renovation of the wine cellar and improvements in the vineyards that were made about 15 years ago. The vineyards are located in an excellent neighborhood, as the neighbors include Pontet-Canet and Lynch-Bages. This wine is a blend that consists of around 80% Cabernet Sauvignon and 20% Merlot. This wine matures in 75% new French oak. They use a fairly strict selection process, as only 60% of the harvest makes it into this top wine. The barrel samples of the 2022 vintage received very high scores, as it received a 98-point score, a 97-point score, and two 96-point scores. And so if you're a fan of Pauillac, you definitely want to give this one some consideration. Fans of Saint-Estèphe will be pleased to learn that there were several outstanding wines made from that region in 2022. For example, Montrose is potentially a candidate for wine of the vintage, and Coste-Strunel also had a very impressive effort. Unfortunately, in some instances, volumes are much lower than typical because there was a devastating hailstorm in June that impacted a number of Saint-Estèphe producers. But the wine I want to talk about today is Calon Segur. This is a very impressive effort for 2022 from this third growth Bordeaux producer. As I explained in my recent video on the third growth Bordeaux producers, Calon Segur has been on an absolute tear since 2014. The catalyst for this hot streak was a complete overhaul in the winery, as well as improvements to the vineyard that were completed just before that. There's no pricing information for this 2022 vintage yet. However, in the past, this wine often sold for around 120 or so on futures. My guess is this one is probably going to be closer to 150 or so due to the extremely high critical acclaim that it's received from a number of critics. This wine is a blend of 70% Cabernet Sauvignon, 24% Merlot, and the rest includes a little bit of Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc. Despite the high-quality fruit for this wine for the 2022 vintage, they used only around 53% of the harvest for this top wine, and so you'll also want to keep an eye out for the second wine from this producer for 2022. And certainly while you're waiting for the 2022 vintage to come out, you should be on the lookout for some of their outstanding past vintages, such as 2015 and 16, and 2018, 19, and 20. Pessac-Léognan wines also performed extremely well in 2022. While Chateau Haut-Brion justifiably gets lots of attention from Pessac-Léognan, there's a wine that actually surpassed Haut-Brion in 2022, according to many critics' barrel sample scores, and that is Haut-Brion's neighbor, Carmes Haut-Brion. This wine is actually a potential candidate for wine of the vintage, as it has two potential 100-point scores from well-known critics. Interestingly, this wine is also a Cabernet Franc dominant wine. The final blend for this wine was 40% Cabernet Franc, 34% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 26% Merlot. In the winery, this producer used 70% whole cluster fermentation. They did that to try to preserve some freshness in the wine, and it also resulted in a reduction of the alcohol by volume percentage. Indeed, when the grapes were harvested, they had potential alcohol by volume of 14.4%, but post-fermentation, the alcohol by volume was only 13.5%. And so it seems like that tactic was a success for this producer. This wine is still maturing in 70% new French oak, 20% Foudre, and 10% Amphora. While I didn't see any pricing information available for this wine yet, it's definitely one that I'm going to keep my eye on and give some strong consideration to purchasing. If you're interested in more Bordeaux videos, please be sure to check the pinned comment below.